So what I want to do is first create a new Rails app, and we'll just do a Rails new, and then I'm going to call this email subscriptions demo. I already have one called subscription, so it's just another name. To pass the template, we use -m, and then kick off Tailwind is what I called my root directory for that template, and then I'll pass in template.rb. So go ahead and create that app and report back. All right, so with our app created, your fan might be spinning if you're on a laptop or something like that. We finally have it ready to roll. So let's cd into email subscriptions demo. Cool. So that's it for creating the app. Next, we can kind of talk about our data side of things. So underneath the hood, we're going to need, of course, a user model. My template that we just kicked this off with already compensates for that. So if you're not following along using my template, you might need to go ahead and generate that. Typically, if you use Devise or some sort of third-party gem for your user authentication, that's a way to go ahead and generate that user model. On the user model, I'm going to have an admin property or a column on the database, a name column, and a username column. The one we need to really kind of worry about is maybe the name and admin. Username's kind of just there if you need it. You can always remove it. On top of the user model, we need a project model. So we'll have the project itself. That's going to have the tasks that we house in the project. And then in the project, we're going to create another associative model that I'm going to call project user. And that's just a way to tie users to projects, but keep it separated from the project model itself. It's just a way to keep that in another database table. So all that table is going to be responsible for is just keeping a user model matched with the project itself. So at any time, we can have multiple users that relate to a specific project. And that's important when we're sending emails because we want to like batch send emails to people who are subscribed to that project or are added to that project. And that'll make more sense when we get to it. But if you're not clear on how that works, it's more of an association that has many through, if you've ever heard of it. And then finally, a task model. That's just the basic task. It's going to belong to a project. And within that task, we'll just have a body attribute that just is the task itself. So a lot of this is boilerplate code. A lot of it has nothing to do with email subscriptions. I just, like I said, for these types of builds or less builds, I like to be thorough, give you some insight of what stuff I would do if I were building something like this. So there's going to be some Ajax stuff with tasks. So when they get completed, we'll give it a default state that changes and then also update the database on the fly without having to refresh the page. So all those things and more are coming your way. Hopefully you're excited. I am. The look and feel of this, I did not pay as much attention to, so forgive me there. We are using Tailwind in this template, so if you're not familiar with Tailwind CSS, definitely read up on it. It seems like the hot new thing. It's increased my productivity tenfold, so I'd really recommend checking it out if you haven't. But at first, with our app installed, let's actually get busy. So I'm going to actually create some scaffolds to kind of make these things go fast in the sense of getting the app ready to roll. So the first is going to be the project model. So we're going to start with a scaffold there. And the G here stands for generate. It's just a shorthand. So we'll say project. And then on the project model, we're going to have 3 columns or attributes, I guess we'll call. So the first is the title, and it's going to be a string. Description will be a basic text column. These are all database properties. And then here we can already add an association in the real time. So on the generation, we can say user belongs to. And this essentially says when a project is created, it should have some sort of user that basically authored that project. What I'll be calling the project creator or author. So it's just a way to say, hey, if you created this project, maybe you can only be the one that edited or something like that. We'll get to that in the view layer and controller layer coming up. So we'll generate that scaffold. And just keeping this train going, we'll just say Rails generate scaffold task. Make sure you're spelling right. Body will be text. That's just basically the to-do or the task itself. With this one, we'll have a couple associations. So project will be belongs to, because a task will belong to a project. And then we'll have another field called complete. That's essentially a Boolean. So it will just toggle true or false there. And when we run this, we will want to update it to be a default to false in the migration. So I'll do that coming up. I think you can do that from this line, like default false, but I'm not sure. I haven't run that before, so I'll do that in a second. And then finally, we need Rails generate model project user. We don't need the whole scaffold for this since it's just going to be a data layer thing. But we'll say user belongs to, and then project belongs to. And we'll get into the models in a second just so it makes a little more sense of what's going on here. Okay, so before I forget, I want to update that one migration to be a default to false. So open this in Visual Studio Code and throw it in a new window. In the DB folder, in the migrate folder, in the create tasks migration, the complete field here, we just want to add a comment of default to false. Okay. And you notice I already have a few here. These were all from the template that I created. So notice I added a few attributes that were custom relative to my template. So to make things easier on yourself, I'd recommend using it. It's not the holy grail of templates. So there's some cooler ones out there, but it's just a way for me to speed things up for these tutorials. So that's essentially it. So we can go ahead and run Rails DB migrate now. Cool. So notice created all of our projects, our tasks, and then our project user models. So those are all migrated to the database. If you want to see what that kind of looks like in real time, we've got a new schema file. And inside, you'll see that what will be essentially SQL tables in the database at some point. So we got our projects table, our user IDs associated with it, and it has an index on that. Our task table, project ID, and our users has some stuff on it too. Okay, so now we need to kind of adjust our model there a bit just to make sure everything's set up to scope the project at hand. So I'll start with the project model. Right now we have belongs to user. We added that automatically when we ran that generation, but we still need to have many tasks. So has many tasks, and we'll say dependent destroy. And what this means is the fact that a task is within a project. If a project were to be deleted, the task should probably be too. So that's what's going on there. It's kind of a recursive thing where that happens. So on the user layer, we need a little more love too. So we have already our devise ready enabled stuff here that was added from my template and generated from devise when we ran that. So this will has many projects. A user can have many projects. Now you could have dependent destroy here too if you want to save database size. That's just kind of a nice to have. I left it off for now. And then on our project user, we already have this association. This will be good to go. Later on, we'll get that more involved. It'll be a has many through concept. Which is kind of confusing in a sense, but it's a way to just go ahead and associate certain things with other things and make it more scalable. We'll pause there on the models and go back to our routing to kind of set things up a bit. This is what it looks like today. As I ran this, we have our resources for projects and tasks, but we need to kind of enhance those a tad. So I'll actually make this a block and put task within project. So our URL will actually be project with the ID of the project. So it'll be like project 1 and then tasks, it'll be plural, and then like whatever, something like that. So that's how that will look. This bit here is added from my template. It's just essentially mounting what will be our background job service that we use, which is Sidekick for this template. Check that out. It's a pretty cool tool for background jobs. It's a queuing system. So think of things of putting them in like assembly line fashion when you need to send a bulk actions in your app. This would actually mount the UI for Sidekick. There's like a UI around it called Sidekick Web, and you need to be an admin to go ahead and view that. So here I'm checking for that. And then for our actual routing, I will keep devise for users as is. We want to update this to projects.index since that will be where we want to route to. So that'll actually point to the projects controller and then the index action. So we'll essentially see all the projects of the current user at that point. So with that in mind, we need to think about the current user. This is something that comes from devise, and it's a method that allows us to scope the thing to the person who is logged in. That's kind of important in the sense of this app. Some apps you might not even need to worry about authentication, so it's just up to you and your project. So one thing we want to do to enforce this is before any action on the project model, we want to authenticate user. And you can pass in, just like up here, you can pass in certain actions. For us, this is going to be every one of them because I want to lock down this to be, you need to log in to do any of these actions. So I'll go ahead and save that one, and then I will do the same on the tasks controller. And it should be before action. Cool. So now if we were to run the app, you could see that you couldn't go to any of these actions without logging in. But I'll go ahead and wait for now because I want to do a little bit more work on our routes file. So this is the basis, which works, but we actually want to scope the person who's authenticated to a specific route path and then one who isn't to a different one. So luckily enough, devise has a nice scoping method that's called devise scope. And you could say for the user model. So for devise, you can pass in any specific user depending on what you want to do. Typically it's a user model, but I've seen it use different like customer or account, etc. So what I want to do here is scope it to a method called authenticated. And then you can say user do. Within this devise scope block, we'll go ahead and put projects root, and then unauthenticated do, we'll say root to home index. And then I'll say as unauthenticated. And that's kind of necessary so these two can be aligned. So if I'm signed out, I'll head to home.index. If I'm signed in and I refresh the page, it's going to go to projects.index every time. Now you could go shorthand here and just do two like that. Up to you. I like to be explicit. So one thing I want to do next is add our projects route to our projects link to our actual nav bar, just so it's easier on ourselves. So I'll go to layouts, application, and we have, this is all from my template. So I'm not, copy it from there, and I'll probably update this to just email subscriptions. Do the same up here. I know this already has kickoff. And then within this block, there's a basic link text. I'm going to actually make this projects. And then it's going to link to the projects path, which is essentially the index action on the projects controller. So it'll go here. And if you're curious of how I just know that URL, it's typically just from practice, but also if you go to Rails info routes, we need to run the server. Rails server. Looks like I have a issue on my routes to route to Actually, I need a comma here. Let's try this again. There we go. If we refresh, we'll see this new path. It's kind of a helping tool. When you generate routes or resources for your app, you'll start to see these URL helpers that are in this view, Rails info routes. Now, it also works for URLs or paths. So notice you can get either. The URL one is the absolute URL. The path is the relative path. So think of it in those contexts. We're going to use the URL helpers and the emails because we'll need the direct path or URL to the thing. That'll be coming up. But like I said, I wanted to update the project's path so we can go check out the actual app at this point. It's going to probably redirect us to the home controller because we're not logged in, which is the point. Yeah, so here we go. If I were to click this, I need to sign in. So that's the whole point of that Authenticate User method we added. So I'll go ahead and do that. And I'm actually going to need to sign up. So I'll use the same accounts I did earlier. So Andy Leverance, Andy at webcrunch.com. Cool. So here's some, of the UI. It's not pretty at this point. I'll update this with some generic code, but we'll get to that in a second. Maybe I'll fast forward to that bit just so you guys can get the grasp of this tutorial rather than just seeing me code some basic stuff. So what I want to do is update the projects form next. So if we go to a new project, it's going to have some basic garbage in it. So projects form, we don't need to show the user ID as a field. We'll handle that in the controller. And then my template includes Tailwind, so we can go ahead and use some Tailwind stuff here. Same for some button classes. So button default. And for these inputs, we'll give them a class of input, class label. So all that stems from my additive style sheets that I added in my template. It comes from the buttons and forms styles there. If you're curious, feel free to go ahead and make those whatever you want. Looks like I don't need that comma. There we go. So nothing fancy here, but it is taken care of. We'll do the same thing for the tasks form. So I'll just kind of go and make that one very similar. Form, complete. Don't need that one. We don't need the project ID. And we'll go ahead and say, oops. That set up, and this will be input, and this will be label. And margin bottom 6. Then finally a button class here, button. So we'll use this in the context of a project. We won't actually be going to like projects that tasks form. The form is going to be in the project itself. So that's one quick thing to think about as we go. So let's go back up to the controller and get into the next part. So let's save those down, close a few of these. The projects controller is going to be like the holy grail of this app. So on the controller itself, we've got this before action that's going to just allow us to initialize this method at the bottom that's going to find the project by the parameter ID that's passed through. One thing we'll need to do is assign the project to the current user, since we do have that association set up in our models. So we want the project to have an author, and that's how this is going to work. All you need to do that is project.user equals current user. And then once you go ahead and create a project, it'll go ahead and save, and that current user will be referenced in the user ID column. So if we want to just give it a shot, just to kind of show you by design, so I'll just say test2, create. Notice the user ID is 1. That's my user ID. We can also check the logs if we want to do a Rails console project.last. We'll show the project. The user ID is 1. So if we say project.last.user, it'll show me. So there's some verification there for you. And that's all set to go. So already we have the basic construct of the app ready. Doesn't look great, but we can go ahead and get things going. So what I want to do on the project index is just clean this up to make it look a lot better. So in the next video, I'll try to keep these at least somewhat short so they're not 2.5 hour long videos. But the next video will focus on getting the UI a bit tuned up and then start working on getting the tasks set up within a project. So I'll see you in that one. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.